Hi, I'm Simon. Thanks for tuning in to The Ordinary Filmmaker. If you're new here, click subscribe to receive notification of my latest videos, which includes notifications, gear reviews, tutorials, and of course these Q&A videos. I'm also giving away a Canon EOS R5 full-frame mirrorless camera. Details can be found in this video here as well as in the video description. Well, here we are. Another week has passed and the temperature's getting cold. It's perfect weather for shooting with the Canon EOS R5 and its overheat modes, and I'm actually shooting in 4K HQ right now. But I do have a lot of questions, so let's get to those right now. Our first question is from Stella. Stella Creative Studios asks, what do you like about photography versus video? What skills, unique tricks in your photos and videos do you use? What I really like about video is that it captures life, that you can go back and look at it later. And that might not seem like a big deal right away, but as the years go by, you can go back, and the great thing about video is it doesn't forget, it doesn't change memories. It records things exactly as they are. And that's why I think, to me, it's very important to apply the right LUT, to get the color balance correctly so that I'm capturing life as it truly does happen. And that's kind of a big deal for me. I've learned recently some of the tricks using ND filters so I can separate the subject from the background. Now in photo mode or stills mode, this is actually very easy to do. But in video mode, it's a lot more difficult. First of all, unlike photo mode, you have to lock your shutter rate. So I'm locked my shutter here at 1/60th of a second. And I want to completely separate myself from the background, so I'm using an f-stop of 1.8. That doesn't give the camera a lot of options. In fact, it doesn't give it any options. You're pretty well fooling with the exposure or the ISO. So to be able to blur that background on a sunny day like today, what I use is a variable ND filter. So I've found that to be a very useful tool when you want to blur the background. Now, if my son or somebody else is running around, well, you're probably going to have pretty well everything in focus, or at the infinite focusing distances, you might have a slight blur to it, but generally when there's movement, you're not going to have much of a depth of field. I used to take photos a lot. It wasn't until I really got into video. And once I got into video, it was kind of like going from a black and white television to a color television. It was hard for me to go back, but I still like photos because photos, they capture life in the exact moment. My 50mm EF 50mm f1.2, the lens I'm using right now, has found new life on this R5. And it's not that the R5 is a great camera; it's that it's a full frame camera. And I find that when I was shooting with my 70D, it wasn't that impressive, but with the R5, it's just truly spectacular. So I would say I shoot video, I bet, about 90% of the time. It's just, it's very, very powerful. And what I do in the background, or not background, what I do in post is I'll utilize scores. There's a lot of movies out there that have incredibly powerful scores with great music, John Williams and others. And what I like to do is, or even Top Gear, I think Top Gear has incredible soundtracks to them. So what I'll do is I like a song, go, oh, that's perfect. I'll go to iTunes, I'll find the song, I'll pay $1, and I'll put it in my video. And that's perfectly fine. I can do that unless I go ahead and put it on YouTube, and now I no longer have the license to do that. But with YouTube, they allow you to, there's a whole music library that YouTube provides. It's completely free. You hear a lot of these other services advertising $14 a month, $30 a month for unlimited music. But for free, YouTube provides you with a whole library, and you might have missed it, but it's right there. When you go to your dashboard, you got videos, comments, subtitles, and right at the bottom there, right near the bottom, is where you have your audio or your music. And anything you select in there can be used. You can put it in your music, your videos, and upload it, and it's got some really good stuff. So those are some tricks and tips that I use. OJ Hansen asks, now this could be a simple answer, but I know that with the Ninja 5 external, the R5 can record hours of 4K HQ without overheating. But how long can you record 8K video externally using the Ninja? It's also nearly infinite record time externally, like the 4K HQ. Is it? Thanks. Well, you can't right now record 4K externally, and for that to happen, both the Ninja and the camera needs to be HDMI 2.1, not 2.0. But depends on where you are in the world, OJ. Since the temperatures dropped here in the last couple of weeks, I've been able to record unlimited 4K HQ, unlimited 4K 60, and unlimited 4K 120, and I'm going to try out 8K at some point. The reason I haven't jumped to that is I just don't see the point to 8K. And I know what you're thinking, but hear me out for a minute. 4K HQ is 8K downsampled to 4K. And since pretty well everybody I know either watches in 4K or 1080, that 4K HQ is essentially 8K video. It's just downsample. It's more detail and it's easier to work with. The camera's doing all the work of downsampling it. So I just really haven't seen a big push to do 8K, but I will do an 8K video very shortly in the cooler temps. But right now we cannot record 8K to any external recorders. I don't think it's too hard for Canon to allow it, but it's just not doable right now. Adam asks, I'm using custom shooting modes C1 at 25 frames per second, C2 at 50 frames per second, and C3 at 100 frames per second. I was unable to assign card slots to custom modes. Is there any workaround, or do I, as always, have to change the card slot manually? Yeah, no, you can't prioritize the card for the custom modes. And while you can change it in the camera, you can tell the camera that you only want to record video to the card slot 1, which is the CF Express card, that you can record photos to both card slots, and that's what I do. I say, okay, let's go ahead and record video only to card slot 1, but record photos to both. And the reason for that is sometimes I take photos when I'm out shooting for a video, and I don't want to have to load in both cards. I bring the CF Express cards, and it's got the photos and the videos. Once I'm done, I format that card. But I don't format the SD card. I usually shoot a lot of photos before I finally bring that card into the computer and start editing. However, despite what you tell the R5, it's kind of like a teenager. It decides to do what it wants. So even though, and I made sure I specified it this time, yep, card slot 1, I told it to do card slot 1. I turned the camera off, took the card out, went to the computer downstairs, applied some log settings, see if it looked okay, then brought it back, and sure enough, the R5 said, hey, I'm recording to card slot 2 now. I don't know why it does that. It's really frustrating. So unfortunately, this is just one of those things you got to do manually. And if you're shooting video, I do recommend the V90 slot SD cards, because you're going to record video to your SD card periodically. It's going to be 4K. It's going to be very big and heavy. And the last thing you want to do is wait half an hour or longer transferring the files. And that's not an exaggeration. These videos that I'm doing right here quite often will take 30 to 40 minutes to offload off an SD card, where it takes less than 10 minutes with a CF Express card. I think it's somewhere around 5 to 7 minutes, so it's certainly much quicker. So unfortunately, there is no quick workaround to this, and they've had this similar problems with the 5D Mark IV before. You tell it what cards to write to, and it kind of does its own thing. Now you can actually tell it, say, no, only write to this card for photos and only this card for videos, but that can bring other problems too, so I wouldn't get into doing that. The Village Mayor asks, if I'm doing B-roll with ambient sounds such as rushing water or rustling leaves, do you think the in-camera will work well, or do I still need to purchase mics for better sound quality? No, I think, now it is dependent on the camera, but no, in the past I haven't found it to be very good. Now I have found that the Sennheiser 400, it's a $200 mic, does a terrific job of capturing leaf sounds and rushing water. But these are sounds you really want high quality. But one thing you should also consider too, if you're using Final Cut, when you're in that first mode there where you can load in your video clips, so right up the top, click over on the second one, it's the music one, and you have sound effects, and there's thousands in there. And I think, I know rushing water is one of them too, leaves in there. Fill around and take a look and see what you have there. But the best thing to do with things like that is have fun, take the camera out for an afternoon, test it out with your in-camera mic to see if it is passable, good enough, and then try a shotgun mic. And I think the shotgun mic is the best one because it will help isolate all other sounds, but it depends on the shotgun mic. I was in an update to my video I put out yesterday, I took a look at, Sony came out with a shotgun microphone, and it's a funky looking thing. It looks like it was developed from the future and sent to the past. Sadly, it only works on Sony cameras, but it's terrific. It's got noise reduction. It's got cardioid. I'm remembering the word. So you can set it so it's omnidirectional, functions as an omnidirectional shotgun mic, or you can get it so it focuses mostly on what's in front, or you got a super cardioid where it's focusing almost like directly in front. And I wanted to buy this mic, but sadly, it won't work unless you have a Sony. And what's really great about this is analog and digital. There's no batteries, there's no cables. Oh, Sony did a terrific job there. So Sennheiser, anybody, if you can duplicate what Sony did there, I'd buy it in a heartbeat. And as far as expense goes, it's not overly expensive. I think it's around $350 US. More expensive than the Sennheiser 400, but cheaper than the Sennheiser 440. So I'm kind of still up in the air as to what microphone to get. The Sennheiser 400 is probably, I know it works. I know it produces pretty good sound, and it'd be great for rushing water and leaves and that kind of sound. It's a bit more ambient. And when it comes to wind noise, it's very, very tolerant. It's very, very good. So yeah, no, it's hard to say. I mean, I can recommend really expensive mics, like the Sennheiser 800, but you're just going to put yourselves into way too much expense for probably what you're looking for. Levi asks, on the R5, can you speed up 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second in post after slowing it down? Well, it definitely depends on the software you're using, but with Final Cut, once I bring the software in, I can do anything I want to it. I can speed it up, I can slow it down, and I can slow it down by any custom number. Now it gives me 2 times, 4 times, 8 times, 20 times. Then I can enter a custom value where I can exceed those numbers, or I can completely slow it down to almost 1 frame a second. So I've got that control. And I can also reverse it as well, which is really, really nice. So yeah, depending on the software you have, there's an awful lot of flexibility. So with Final Cut, I know you can do it. With DaVinci Resolve, the paid version, I'm sure you can do it. With Adobe Premiere, I'd be surprised if you couldn't do it. And iMovie and Windows Movie Maker, I'm not so sure about. But I know that iMovie's pretty functional. It might give you that control, but it depends on your software. Srijan asks, does Fuji have that RGBW sensor you were talking about? No, it doesn't. Now, it's not as typical, and I think it's the cold weather. My lips, words speak me not. It's not using an RGBW. It's still using an RGB, or what I like to refer to as an RGGB, because it's heavily focused on green, which is what Bayer, when he came out with this type of sensor, said, well, look, this is kind of how the human eye sees things. Yeah, maybe true, but it's not the best, and it's what we're all using. Now, it's not a RGBW sensor, it's a filter. So it's more accurate to refer to it as an RGBW filter. What the Fuji does is it has a 6x6 sensor, and with the green being very dominant, as you can see in this slide here, the one on the right is the Fuji X-Trans filter, and you can see it's got a very different pattern than the standard filter that's in pretty well every other camera. And when I should say other camera, I'm talking about a hybrid stills or a hybrid video camera. You can actually buy cameras out there that actually have 3 sensors in them, and one sensor only takes blue, the other sensor only takes red, and the other one only takes green. And the dynamic range, the low light performance on these, the color registration accuracy is just phenomenal. But there's really not a big push for camera companies to want to do this because no one's complaining, everyone's pretty happy. So I developed the dollars in places where people aren't asking for things, when pretty well everyone's doing it that way, and put it where people are asking, like getting IBIS and Canon. We asked for it for years, and then finally Canon's throwing in everything, including the PowerShot Zoom, which is only a $300 unit. So it's really nice that we're seeing more features come up, but I really don't see that one trickling down anytime soon. They're more for industrial applications, one with those 3 different types of sensors. Clive asks, hey, will Canon EOS R Mark II or the RP Mark II be coming anytime soon? I really don't think so. When I was interviewing Craig at Canon Rumors many, many months ago, I asked him this very question, and he said, no, those are dead-end cameras. There isn't going to be follow-up to them, and I say that with a bit of a grain of salt. There isn't going to be an EOS R Mark II. There isn't going to be an EOS RP Mark II. However, there are cameras that are going to stand in for these and more or less replace them. So there is a rumored camera, a rumored body, an RF body, to be what is referred to as a low-end budget camera, to be a sub $1,000 camera. Now, I have no idea what price this is going to be. Is it going to be $999, or is it going to be something silly like $699 or $799? And it really depends on what features they give you. Are you going to have a fully articulating LCD screen? Are you going to have a viewfinder? Because we can take away the viewfinder and charge $100 for it, but if you don't need it, you're saving $100. And I'll be honest with you, with the R5, I do still like shooting through the viewfinder for photos, but there are a lot of applications where it's just so easy to tap on the LCD screen. I got the camera ready, and I tap where I want it to focus, and it works quite well. So we might be able to get to a point where you don't need a viewfinder and you can save $100. Now, as far as the EOS R Mark II, I thought the R6 was going to pretty much fill that void. And if you look at the price of the R6, it's pretty much in line with the EOS R Mark II if you account for inflation. $23.99 versus $24.99, the initial prices for both cameras. And I really kind of thought, and that's where I still kind of see things. I see the R6 as kind of a replacement for the EOS R. Yes, it's around $1,700, on sale for about $1,500. But based on its initial price, I really see it as being closely paired to the R6. But there are some holes in Canon's lineup right now. So for example, being able to shoot 4K 30 without overheating, the 90D can do it, although I know in certain heat situations it might shut off. But I would love to be able to shoot in 4K 30 without having to worry about overheat. And of course, you know what I'm thinking, those nasty record limits. Ali asks, what do you think of the new Sony A7C? Not a whole lot. It doesn't really interest me. And you know, part of the fault there lies with Sony. When they released the ZV-1, the vlogging camera, and they said it was a vlogging camera, just like they say that the A7C is a vlogging camera. But they did a terrific announcement. They had like a 15-minute video telling you exactly why this is a great vlogging camera. And they didn't do really any of that with the A7C. So I look at the A7C and I look at some of the limitations going, $1,800 US for, I mean, I would rather probably get the A6100, or I'd look to the Sony A7S III. Now, I know these aren't cheap cameras, but then again, neither is $1,800, because once you put a lens on it, you're looking at some decent money. So I think once you start to get at $1,700, you start to ask yourself, you know, is this like buying one of those cars where it's got no features, they get you in the door at a really low price, and then you find out you don't have air conditioning, no power steering, no stereo, you have to wind up the windows manually, and they say, oh, well, just for another couple of grand you get this. And I think the A7C is almost like that. Now, it might be a super duper highly capable vlogging camera, so if it's like the ZV-1, but it's got that full frame magic, then yeah, it might very well be worth it. But you know, I did some reading, didn't do a lot of reading on it, because it's one of those cameras like the S5 from Panasonic that really isn't even close to my roadmap. Like if I drive into the ditch, I'm not going to see the S5 or the A7C there. I got to really drive off down a dirt country road before those cameras start interesting me. Whereas the A7S III, I'm really eager to get my hands on that camera, really see what it has to perform. But you know, while full frame is great, it doesn't mean that APS-C is terrible, and there's an awful lot of really capable APS-C cameras out there, both DSLR and mirrorless. John Drummond asks, well, sort of asks, he wants me to agree or disagree. Canon won't develop any new M bodies or EF-M lenses, but they'll keep making and selling the current releases before they sell well. I disagree. I don't see that Canon's ready to transition off the EF-M platform to the RF yet. Let's look at it this way. There's very little in terms of rumors or hints that there's going to be anything coming out on the RF platform, and they're not likely to even hint at that because they don't want to restrict sales of the EF-M system. I think we're going to see some more bodies and lenses on the EF-M, and while there will be a migration plan, I think this will be many years in the works, and I think it does make sense to eventually move over to the RF platform, but I don't see that happening anytime soon, John. Sachet asks, how long do you think Canon will take to release the next iteration of their R5 or R6 models? Typically, mirrorless models from other competing brands have a 2 to 3 year refresh rate. Yeah, that's true, and Sony was pumping them out almost every year for a while there, but this is Canon, and the R5 is essentially the 5D Mark V, and that camera pretty much came out every 4 years along with the 1DX Mark III, and it was usually in time right around the Olympics. So when are we going to get the next one? You know what? It wouldn't surprise me if Canon decided, okay, you know what, we're going to release an update to this camera in 2 years or 3 years. But currently, it's 4 years for the R6. Once you start getting down in price, Canon will start to release these cameras every 2 to 3 years, but it's all speculation. I would say 2 to 3 years, maybe the R6 and the R5. 4 to 2 years. I think it's more likely it's going to be in 4 years, but who knows? They might decide to fix a few things very quickly, come out with another one in 2 years. We'll just have to wait and see. I hope I got your name right, by the way. I wasn't sure if it was Sachet or Sachet. You'll have to let me know in the comment section down below. David Norris asks, I think I can speak for the 13,000 plus subs when I say this. Camera stuff is boring. When is your review video on squirrels coming out? And also, I want to bring up a question that John brought. He wanted to know which is more photogenic, the basic gray squirrel or the Canadian melanistic, what is it? Melanistic, the Canadian melanistic phase, and why? So I am working on an epic production of squirrels right now. I did shoot some when I got the Canon 800mm, but I need to get to basically March because I've got plans to shoot some great shots of squirrels over the winter. And then I'm going to put out my squirrel masterpiece, but don't expect that to come out before March. It's something to look forward to. But no, yeah, I do talk a lot about squirrels. I don't know, it's just something about them. I find squirrels to be one of the most intriguing creatures, well, what I call the backyard creatures. You know, every other creature, when they decide to do something, they commit, they do it, they're gone. Bad or worse, they do it. Snails, worms crossing the road, they're gone, they're doing it. There's no turning back. But a squirrel, they run really fast and then something startles them, they go back in a different direction, another direction, and they just, I almost use the term squirrel as an adjective for when I've had too much coffee. You get that squirrelish feeling where you're on edge, you're always looking off in different directions, and you're feeling a little bit anxious. And there's just something about squirrels that I like. But they're harmless creatures, tree rats as some would call them. But I don't mind squirrels unless they try to get into my house through the attic. Then of course it's war, and I am going to win. But other than that, no. Usually my son will capture some acorns this time of year. We'll save them in the garage, and then when winter starts getting a little tougher, we'll put out the acorns for the squirrels to eat. So that might be an opportunity too, because I am planning on getting the 800mm. I'm just waiting for that to go on sale. So I was going to say going on squirrel, but no. Waiting for that to go on sale. But yeah, more squirrel videos will be coming out in the near future. Thanks, guys. Funny question. Sajan asks, how long do you think we need to wait for the next firmware update for the Canon R5 and R6? I shouldn't have to wait more than about 2 to 3 weeks for the R5. We're definitely going to get one in October for the R6. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if Canon releases one about the same time or shortly thereafter. Jackson Law asks, do you think the R6 is good enough for shooting wedding video in 1080p? In my country, most content is still 1080, and I don't think that this will change over the next 5 years. Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with shooting in 1080, but I want to answer the question a little differently than what you asked for. If you want to provide the best 1080 you can, at the very least shoot in 4K 30. Now you say R6, right? R6. I would shoot in 4K 30 and then downsample to 1080. I just think you're going to get better detail. But for most people these days, you know, it's only in the recently in the last couple of years that people have accepted 1080p and have the computers and capabilities to be able to play 1080p. It took so long for 1080p to be accepted. And even when I started filming about 10 years ago, I didn't embrace 1080p right away. I used 720p. It was easier to work with and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think 1080 is going to be a problem. But if you can, try shoot in 4K 30 and then downsample, and you'll get more detail. It'll just look better. Justin asks, I've heard that the R5 is basically a high-resolution 1DX Mark III. Thoughts? No, it isn't. If anything, the R5 is more of a continuation of the 5D. The reason why you're hearing that is that the processor inside of the 1DX Mark III has been brought down to the R5 and the R6, so it's very, very fast. So if you have the R5, what you'll notice is when you're shooting with autofocus, like I can look down here right now at my Canon Camera Connect, and I can see as soon as I look down, boom, the eye autofocus, the square box just went right down to my eye quickly, and it's like I'm trying to fool it, move my head really quickly, and it's very, very fast. It's not like the EOS R or some other cameras where it's like it's like a second or two late. It's very, very fast. That coupled with IBIS, with the low light, it's a whole lot more difficult to miss shots when shooting with these cameras now. They produce really, really good results. So no, it's not at all. You don't get anywhere near the fast frame rates of the 1DX Mark III. And I think if you look at the 1DX Mark III and the 5D Mark IV, these cameras are very, very similar. They're almost identical. In video, you get 4K 30, but in the 1DX Mark III, you get 4K 60. You get 120 frames per second in the 1DX Mark II. Sorry, I said 1DX Mark III, but 1DX Mark II. And on the 5D Mark IV, you got 120 frames per second, but it was in 720. So if we look at the 1DX Mark III and compare it to the R5, we can see that, and this is a little strange because you're comparing DSLR to the R5, and in the case of the R5, it produces better video than the 1DX Mark III. The 1DX Mark III is a little bit more soft. And we almost need to wait for the R1 to properly compare because, video-wise, I really like the R5, and I'd want to shoot with the R5. I have no interest in getting the 1DX Mark III anymore because of the R5's video capabilities. And photo-wise, 12 frames per second, continuous autofocus with the R5 is pretty good. But the 1DX Mark III will really hit it out of the park with around 16 frames per second. But you have to keep the sensor clean. You're going to get oil showing up on the sensor because this camera is working the fastest it possibly can with the mechanical structure that it has. Mirrorless doesn't have that, so I think the R1 is going to be quite a bit faster in stills and still be able to produce really incredible results. So yeah, definitely not a mirrorless version of the 1DX Mark III. And I think there's a few other reasons for that too. Yeah, I think they probably have very similar autofocus, but yeah, no, the video is definitely way better. Photo-wise, yeah, unless you really want that high speed, I'd probably just go with the R5 or even the R6. 77 Driss. Do you think Canon will charge dollars to have C-Log 3 firmware updates as many other companies have done with log upgrades? Canon also did this with the 5D Mark IV. And yes, I'm aware that they did charge us $100, but keep in mind, to get that, you actually had to send your camera off. Now, yes, you could buy the camera with it already installed and it charged $100 for it, but there was more effort involved in providing it. Now here, this camera is already capable to be able to handle C-Log, so to provide us an update and a firmware update, there's no extra effort involved. Question is, will they take the opportunity to make $100 off us? What do you think? I personally, if I got the results and they were that much better, I'd have no problem spending the $100. Will they do it? I don't know. It's a really good question. If Canon's listening, no, they won't listen to me, but I wouldn't be surprised if they charge us money for it. But at the same point, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. I think it's a 50-50 chance on that one. But as far as rumors go, there's no rumors saying we were going to have to pay for it at this point. Garvey asks, how is performance at 4K HQ 24 frames per second? Being a filmmaker, I don't understand the want to shoot at 30 and 60 frames per second. That part has gone over my head, so I can't find anybody that talks about 24 frames per second. You know what? I had completely planned on shooting this video in 24 frames per second just to show it to you. Let me explain the reason why I shoot in 30 frames per second and why you might choose 24 frames per second. Look. I'm not telling you to look at me, but the look. I find that 30 frames per second provides more true to life. There's a whole lot less motion blur. I find it gives you a much more realistic look, and that's what I'm going for. Now, 24 frames per second gives you a little bit more motion blur, but 24 frames per second, other than look, gives you something else. You save about 20% in storage costs because 30 frames per second is about 20% bigger in terms of file sizes, all I to all I, IPB to IPB. But it is very much a different type of look and feel. I really apologize. I wanted to record this in 24 frames per second for you, but I completely forgot about it until I saw your question right here. I have recorded in 24 frames per second before. I just prefer the look of 30. It can do 24 frames per second, no problem. It's in the camera. I've shot it before. You can set the shutter speed to 1/50th of a second. I see no reason why you couldn't do it and not get good results. Bug me about it in this video, put a comment in there, so when I'm reading through them, after I publish the video and I look through the comments, I'll remind myself next weekend to put it in there. Tristan asks, what's your takeaway in terms of sharpness, noise, rolling shutter, and DR between the R5 and the C200? More specifically, between the R5 and all-I 4K HQ C-Log, also 8K RAW, and the C200 4K RAW 12-bit. Well, if you put these cameras side by side, you're not going to notice a too terribly different not a whole lot of difference between the cameras. Well, the R5 provides 4K HQ, which is 8K downsampled. The C200 provides really, really good detail. So even though it's only 4K RAW compared to the 8K RAW or the 4K HQ, you're not going to notice a huge difference. Now, the C200 does have a stop or two of extra dynamic range, so that's going to be a benefit to the C200. But the one place where the R5 kicks the C200's butt, 4K 120. 4K 120 on the C200 does not provide autofocus, whereas the R5 does. So right then and there, if you need that 4K 120, the R5 is better. Now, the C200 doesn't overheat, whereas the R5 does, and that's a difference there. But comparing specs with these two cameras is not going to help you out. But if you put them side by side, you're going to find that the C200 is very similar to the R5, and unless you're pixel peeping or really looking at it closely, you might not tell the difference. Most ordinary people wouldn't. But that 4K 120 is going to offer a big difference. Now, if I remember correctly, the C200 doesn't do 10-bit, it only does 8-bit, whereas the R5 does 10-bit, and it's going to provide up to C-Log3, but I'd have to check on that. I think that's the case as well. I do apologize. My neighbors like to talk really loud so everybody can hear them. I'm hoping that this mic does a pretty good job of blocking those background sounds. But if you have neighbors, those kind of neighbors where they talk really loud to the point where you can hear them when they're on the phone and they're in their house, yeah, we'll see how this goes. But we're almost done. We've shot for about 36 minutes now, so I can't imagine I have more than about 10 minutes to go. The Village Mayor asks, Canon rumors mention the EF to RF mount adapters will be shipping again soon as they've been in high demand. Aren't there any third-party manufacturers to produce the same mount adapters, and would you recommend just sticking with Canon's own? Right now, Canon's the only game in town, but there is another company called, what is it, Breakthrough Filters or something like that. I published a story just the other day, and what they're doing is they're coming out with an adapter that's going to be weather sealed, weatherproofed, and it's going to be a replacement for, well, not a replacement, it's going to compete with Canon's own variable ND filter that sits between the body and the lens, which works. So in that case, you can only have either the, if you do that, you can't put the EF glass on there, but it works for RF glass. And they say they're going to be doing improvements and autofocus and a whole bunch of other things. It's going to be cheaper. And the biggest problem I have with Canon's is that little adjustment thing you use to adjust the ND filter is super sensitive, and a lot of people complained about that. But this looks to be really good, and they're also offering you, I think it's $69 or $150 if you actually send the Canon one back to them. They'll give you a discount off it. And I don't think it's very expensive. I think they're charging somewhere around $100 or $150 for their adapter, and then there, of course, there's the insert. Do I recommend staying with Canons? Not necessarily. It depends on what you're getting. If you're getting the EF to RF adapter, it works really well. I have one on here now that's allowing me to shoot with the EF 50mm f1.2, and it's terrific. And so because of that, I have to purchase an ND filter that goes on top of the lens, because I thought of getting Canon's own one, and it actually is pretty expensive. I think it's like $400 or $500. That's with the ND filters, and I think 0 to 9 stops. The one I have here is the Keynote, and it gives me, I think, 0 to 8.5 stops, and it does a really good job. I think this one costs me about somewhere around $120 US, but I have to buy it for each lens. So you kind of have to look at your inventory. How many lenses do you have that's EF glass? How many are RF glass? And then just read to hear what people have to say about these lenses. I don't recommend sticking with Canon. I don't recommend switching. Just find the best products that work for you. Thrandu asks, Panasonic S5 or the Sony A7C, which is the best option for the video enthusiast? The Sony, for sure. And I know what you're thinking, and I know what you're all thinking, right? The Panasonic's depth from defocus autofocus system is not good for your video enthusiast, your ordinary filmmaker. We don't want to have to be worrying about pulling focus. If you're doing YouTube studio stuff, then the Panasonics are great. They're fine. Anywhere where you want to be able to pull focus, they're perfectly fine. But you know, I don't want to have to be pulling focus manually. So many cameras do a great job of autofocus today. Canon, Sony, for example. Why do I want to go back? Now, if this is your bread and butter and you shoot a lot of with the Panasonics, you're doing production work, and yes, you're going to have different people doing different jobs and pulling focus manually. These cameras do a great job. I'm not saying the Panasonic S5 is a terrible camera. It isn't. Panasonic makes incredible cameras. But seriously, guys, depth from defocus still in 2020? Yeah, almost 2021. Come on, guys, it's ridiculous. Let's change it over. You just had a really bad earnings call. Let's go ahead and put a good autofocus in there, a phase detect, and watch those sales numbers tick up. But yeah, frustrating. Now, guys, just one thing here. I don't know if my lips are turning blue or purple. In previous videos, I had comments that it was Canon colors. It's not. It's currently 63 degrees in the shade, and I'm quite cold. So what happens to me is when I get cold, my fingers, my toes, my lips, they start, well, my fingers and toes don't turn purple, but they start to get cold, and my lips turn purple, but I feel warm inside. It's just my body's way of keeping it warm, I guess. So if my lips are turning purple, it's not C-Log, it's not the grading, it's me. So anyways, let's go on to our next question. And our last question is from Ron. Ron asks, hi, thanks for your honest assessment of the Panasonic S5 last week. Now I'm considering either the Canon EOS R or the R6. I'm a hybrid photographer, a videographer, and looking for the best value. Now that the new firmware has been released for the R6, which one would you consider? Well, you said value. So to me, value isn't the lowest price. It means what gives me more capabilities, which camera can I get more out of? And I'm going to tell you the R6, and here's why. Video mode, the EOS R topped out at 24 frames per second in 4K. It didn't do 30, so if you were a 30 frames per shooter like I am, that was a problem. It didn't do 120 frames per second in 1080. It basically borrowed the same video capabilities from the 5D Mark IV in mirrorless form. So I was pretty disappointed with it, and the rolling shutter was pretty bad. The R6, rolling shutter is much better. It's got a much faster processor, and that's why. You've got 4K 30 up to 30 frames per second, although you do have to deal with overheat. So depending on the climate you're in, that could be an issue. What else here? I'm just checking to see if the recording time is still going. So we're still recording because 4K HQ, I've gone well beyond the time I'm supposed to be recording. So looking back on the video, we got 4K 130, we got 120 frames per second, we got, I believe, 60 frames per second in 4K on the R5, and that's the R6, and that's where it tops out. So video-wise, the R6 just offers better video. I know the EOS R doesn't overheat, and this is where looking at your capabilities and how long you shoot will make a difference, and what kind of environment you shoot in. Stills wide, we've got the same processors in the 1DX Mark III. We've got IBIS, first of all, IBIS, and it works. Human eye detection, animal eye detection. I was able to lock on birds and squirrels, and people have been able to lock on insects. So right there, IBIS, the faster processor, because the IBIS is very, very fast. Autofocus is very, very fast. Sorry, I should say the IBIS is very smooth. And you've got better low light performance. And all those working together just help you nail the shots a whole lot more. So the R6 is a much better camera over the EOS R. But then you got to look at the price. There's a pretty big difference in price right now. The EOS R, that's what I meant to say. The EOS R goes on sale for about $1,500. The R6 isn't going to likely drop below $2,500, so that's $1,000 difference. So for that extra $1,000, is it giving you the value that you need to justify the R6? And of course, the EOS R gives you all eye. The R6 doesn't give you all eye, it gives you IPB. So unless Canon brings back all eye, that's something else for you to consider as well. If you don't need slow motion, like 120 frames per second, then that's another reason why the R6 is pretty good. If you're not capturing movement a lot, then the rolling shutter isn't going to be a problem. But there's far more checkboxes supporting the R6 than the EOS R. Well, that brings us to the end of another Q&A session. I'm not actually recording this Saturday morning because it's looking really, really cold. And what I'm doing is I'm shooting this one after work, so that way I can actually sleep in and I can relax on the weekend. So that's what I'm going to try to do now, is shoot these Q&A sessions either on the Thursday night or the Friday night, weather permitting. And that will give me a bit more flexibility on the weekend. I don't want to have to shoot every day. I want to have some time off. I want to relax, take a break. I think that's the best way of doing this. Thank you guys so much for your recent comments on microphones. One of the biggest problems I'm having is trying to get the value that I want. Having seen that Sony shotgun mic, the one without wires, the one without a battery that you just sit on top, it just works. It's digital, it's analog, it's got noise filters, it's got what's it, cardioid, so you can have it omnidirectional or it can be very super cardioid. That is powerful, and I've seen enough reviews of people trying it out to see that the results are very good most times. And even when it's super cardioid and there's a lot of noise in the background or in the foreground, the voice doesn't sound tinny, and I want those capabilities. And right now, under $400, I can't find it, and I don't want to spend $2,000 or $1,000 on a microphone. So I'm hoping somebody's looking at what Sony's done and is planning on coming out with something like that. I'd really like to see that, and if there is something like that out there, let me know. But these Q&A videos, as it gets colder, I'm still planning on shooting outside. Now, I probably won't shoot here. The foliage will go, and I'll probably shoot over here because I'll probably be in a couple of feet of snow here, and I need to find a better spot where I can easily get by and find a good place to frame it up. If it doesn't look good, it's not very good, then I'll shoot inside. But there's no reason why I can't shoot this outside in the winter. Just see how far I can go and how much I can push things. We're also coming up to a very exciting time, September and October. We're already starting to see a bunch of cameras come out. Next week, keep your eye out for Canon Vision. We're supposed to be getting the Canon Cinema C50 and the C70. Now, Canon Rumor says there's a chance we're going to see both of them next week, but that the C50 might follow up a little later. We're also expecting, and follow up to a previous question one of you asked me, I think it was John, about any more, agree or disagree, any more EFM bodies or lenses. I wouldn't be surprised if we get an announcement in the next couple of weeks leading up to the end of October. If we don't hear anything this year, then that to me would suggest that, okay, maybe they're not going to give us anything, but I don't think so. I think we're going to definitely see an EFM body and at least a couple of at least one lens, but we'll just have to wait and see. So far this year, we haven't gotten anything, but Canon's generally only releasing one lens every year, and some years they don't, but then some years they give us two. So we're not missing any data points yet. We pretty well need to roll over into January the 1st, and if we didn't get anything this year, that could be indicative, but that could also mean we get two lenses in 2021. As far as full frame cameras from Canon, we might be getting, I haven't heard much, but there was a plan to replace the EOS RP with an entry-level full frame EOS RF camera body, but we'll just have to wait and see about that. Sony, of course, next week, they start shipping the A7S III, so that's exciting. Panasonic GH6. So I just had a news article or a news video just a few days ago talking about the GH6, and Yamane has come out and said we're working on it, so there is going to be a GH6. The S5 is not a full frame replacement of the GH5, but sadly I can't see for the life of me these guys are going to pull away from their DFD, and sadly for me, I have no interest in the GH6 because, you know, I have no interest in depth from defocus autofocus systems anymore. Not in 2021. Squirrel! No, that's a rabbit. I got a rabbit in my backyard. Now, you can't eat my vegetables because I really don't have any left, and after tonight I think it's going to freeze everything. The frost is going to hit. It's going to be 3 degrees or 38 degrees Fahrenheit. So that kind of covers off the news a little bit. Just a reminder that I am giving away the R5. I have received a couple comments, people saying, yeah, right, you're giving that away. Yeah, right, I am. Now keep in mind, this is when I reach 100,000 subscribers, and at that point, what I project, my revenue will probably be around $3,000 a month US. So it should only take about 2 months to essentially pay for the camera body. Well, less than 2 months. So why not? No big deal. I'm not giving away my R5. Even when I get the Sony A7S III, I'll be keeping both cameras. I won't be getting rid of either one. I think it'd be great to have an A and B camera being both of those two cameras. So I am giving that away. I'll be doing a contest. Anybody who's subscribed to my channel where you allow your subscription to be visible, I'll be grabbing all those as soon as I click over to 100,000. The very next day, I'm going to pull out all the names, and I'm going to use a random number generator to identify a person, and I'll be giving it away. Now, there are some... Oh, did you see that? A bee landed right on my hand. Yeah, I know, squirrel. I'm a little bit... My mind's all over the place. How much record time do I have? 25 minutes. I got 5 minutes to end this before the record timer kicks in. I'm glad I looked. So where was I with that? Oh yeah, the R5. So I'm definitely giving it away. I'll do a random number generator. And look at there are some restrictions. There are a few countries based on legalese in those countries I can't give it away. But up until then, I know it might seem like it's a ways away, but I'm working hard to try and get this channel growing a bit more. When I do hit 20,000 subscribers, I'm giving away the Synco Lav S6E microphone. If you're one of those few people that are still using an in-camera microphone, you're going to love this. It's going to really help improve your audio. Sure, a Tascam at $200 is better, but for the price of this thing and what it gives you, I think is really good. And then at 30,000, I'll have another prize, 40 and 50. And as we get closer to 100,000 subscribers, the prizes are going to get better. But that's it for now. Don't forget to subscribe for you having your chance to win any of those 2 prizes. And if you have any questions or comments, put your questions and comments in the comments section down below, and I'll get back to you shortly. Thanks so much for watching The Ordinary Filmmaker. We'll see you again soon.